this the A row right here? You all make A.
All right. Okay, good afternoon. We want to try to start on time. And, okay, uh, we have one presentation today, and I know that some of you that are here, you've got to go to a class, and so we're putting the junior high in the back in case that is the case. Senior high, you'll stay until the presentation is done. And obviously, we want to keep bathroom breaks to a minimum. But we're going to allow the speaker to go until he's done. Then we're going to take a time for questions and answers. So that will be fun. So be thinking of good questions. And I want to remind you that tonight at 6:30, the conference begins, and there will be adults and other guests that will be coming. But you can still register for the conference, and there's a green form on the back that gives the schedule of what we're going to be talking about. So it'll be tonight from about 6:30 to 9:30, and then tomorrow morning starts around 9 and goes until about 3:30. We invite you to come because we think the subject is that important. All right. Let's see. I'm looking for Mrs. Keeley, and I don't see her, so I think we're. Oh, hi. Yeah. Okay. Was there anything I was supposed to tell them besides what I just did? Enjoy. Okay. Yeah. All right. From a physics teacher, enjoy. Okay. All right. I'm going to turn this over to Steve. Steve will introduce our speaker. And really, I hope you'll enlarge your thinking.
Okay. As a former high school principal, coach, teacher, etc., I've been around a lot of high school kids, middle school kids. You guys are awesome. I'm telling you. You're really well behaved. You're attentive. I can see that. You're actually watching. One of the things I know as a teacher and a coach and a principal is you all now are entering what we call the black hole of learning. Right, teachers? You've had lunch. All the blood in your little tummy is now, or in your brain is leaving the brain and going down to take care and digest that food that you just put into your tummy. And that's why you end up being sleepy right after lunch more than you normally are. So we're in the black hole of learning. So fight that off for about 15 or 20 or 30 minutes, and then you'll come on through that and you'll be okay. Now, I want you to know that we've been nibbling at the issue of evolution in the first three talks that you heard this morning. You hear us peck away at it a little, peck away. We're going to go at it and we're going to hit it head on in this presentation. And this is a presentation about evolution. And I want to introduce to you Dan Aldrich. And I'm going to interview Dan briefly and then we'll get going, okay? Got some good stuff to show you. So this will be interesting for you. Dan, how are you this morning?
Good. Can you
Since
hear me
it's
all right?
afternoon, right?
Yeah, it's
All
great.
right. Oh, look at this.
All right, let's
The
go.
men
Let's
are
go.
leading things off, ladies.
Let's go.
Come on. So tell us a little bit about where you grew up in this state or next state over, whatever. A little bit
Right.
about growing up.
So I was born in Kansas City. My dad was the barber in Liberty, Missouri from when I was a kid. And we moved to Arizona, and I was raised there. And after school, I ended up going in the military for a period of time and served overseas a couple of tours and came back. My background, education was chemistry and science, that type of thing. I loved science. I was a devout evolutionist. I was the president of my science club at school. One thing led to another, and Jesus found me, and I got saved and came to understand a lot of things I thought were true really weren't when tested. And I worked in information sciences with a large company for almost 30 years and retired a few years ago and started another little company helping other companies. And that's what I do today. We have my wife of 32 years, Vicki, is right over here.
Wave your hand back
Ed
there in
Brown.
the corner,
All
Vicky.
you guys are
Come
wearing-
on, wave your hand back there.
There she is.
She's the brains of the operation, ladies.
Sorry, I'm getting some. It's probably me, man. I'm sorry with this feedback. There you go. Thank you, brother. So and we
You
have
ready
a
to
son.
go?
We have a son. He's 30 and he's married and he's doing great. And so, this is kind of real close and to my heart, and it's a passion I have because I was once duped by my public school education about specifically evolution. So.
At the end of this, when he finishes, we'll take questions, but Dave will also come up.
Yeah.
So if you had questions about the first two laws and science and stuff, we'll answer those questions too. We just didn't have time. We wanted you to make sure you had time to eat. Okay, Dan, take it away. Let's go.
Okay. So what do you guys know about evolution? I'm just saying this, rhetorically. I'm not going to ask you to everybody stand up and tell us what you know. But do you think that Darwin's evolutionary theories, we'll give him grace, call them theories. Do you think that they're true? What do you really, and you're probably sitting here saying, well, I really don't know. Depends on, hopefully you're saying to yourself, what type of evolution are you talking about? Because that's kind of what the trick is, the bait and switch with evolution. So about a year ago, we were asked to do a presentation online to lots of people and present evolution. Dave did first and second laws of science, and I did the evolution piece, and we put that out there. Our heart was that we're dealing with guys about your age. I happen to have a freshman boys class that I teach, high school boys, and I started finding that really about 6th, 7th, 8th grade, people are like, man, if they're in public school and they're hearing that message, they're starting to think, hey, this thing is for real, and that means the Bible can't be true, and all this kind of goofiness. So I was asked actually to present and not use Bible verses, just use the scientific method and prove that evolution is wrong. And so that's one of the things that we used as a tenet of this presentation. So we could use it in a public school environment if we were ever allowed to, but we could at least present the facts from a scientific perspective and not from a faith perspective, not just our faith as Christians, but evolution is a faith, it's a religion. I believed that nothing became everything. I believed that frogs became princes, okay? I did, literally. So what I want to teach you, though, is the real truth behind this, what's motivating it, and also what these different terms are that are used to describe evolution. Okay, the first is something called classical Darwinism is common descent, which means we all came from a single-celled organism, from the goo to the zoo to you. All right, come on, give it up for that. That's right. Okay. Do you think you evolved from a single cell organism to become the magnificent creature that God made you to be? Okay, if you do, watch carefully. So natural selection is the other secondary component.
Why are you, your mic.
My mic, is it hot? How about that? How's that? Is that better? Okay, let's go. All right, so natural selection is a little different, okay? Natural selection, have you ever, guys, raise your hand if you've ever heard survival of the fittest. Yay. That actually is kind of true, but not in the sense that Darwin proposed it, right? He proposed that these animals that survived over other animals would literally evolve through mutations to become stronger and stronger, mutate to be stronger and stronger and stronger. And those traits somehow would end up in all of the species or kinds of those animals all over the world. And they actually could evolve into a new form or kind of animal. Natural selection was presented as that beneficial mutation is the key to it. So let me ask you a question. Do you think that mutations, by and large, are beneficial? Well, how many of you guys, I know you raised your hand on dogs, have dogs at home, right? But if you have like a dog that has been mutated to be a specific species, size, shape, color, like a Pomeranian or a poodle or something, right? Are those dogs healthier than the original kind? Why is that? The more mutations you get, you can get short-term gain out of a mutation to survive a short period of time, but in the long run, the animals typically go extinct. The mutations cause them to go deaf and blind and whatnot. It doesn't even, the second law, if the second law is true, genetically, these animals are really not getting better. They may have some benefits short-term, but they can't survive long-term. We'll talk about that. So this is where your kind of mutations come from to give you natural selection. And the last is something called adaptation. And this is where the trick is. Yes, if you are on the HMS Beagle and you go to look at finches, right, in the Galapagos Islands, and you see finch beaks changing over a season, you can say, well, that's kind of a micro change of sorts. But did that finch ever change to another type of bird? No, he's just a finch, he's a different type of finch. So adaptation can actually is used to say, yes, animals can adapt to their environments and they can become more successful based on changeable attributes programmed into their DNA, designed into their DNA, but they don't change kind. So the trick is, you'll see this in adaptation, they will teach you that somehow these small adaptations within a kind can somehow lead to some other form of life. Well, that's the trick. It never happens. You just see different species of the animal, but not. So when somebody says, do you believe in evolution? You could say, well, are you talking about natural selection, common descent, or more of a microevolution with adaptation? Because I think animals adapt, yeah, but I don't think they turn into other kinds, So you really have to understand this when you go off into your college life and life in general, okay? So we're going to take the scientific method now, which is you look to see what's happening. Who's a skeptic? Raise your hand. I'm a skeptic. Yes, okay. Make an observation. Write some questions about what you observe. Okay, if I see this and I see that, that means this. Those questions become some type of a hypothesis that you can test. Then you determine what data points you're going to test, and then you predict what the evidence should lead to if it's true. And so you start with a hypothesis of, well, from what I see, if that's really true, then I should see this, then that, and here are the metrics, here are the numbers, here are the data points I should see that tell me that this is true. And so you start with a hypothesis, and so we'll start with Darwin going to the Galapagos, and he says, I see these finch beaks changing. The next thing he says is, well, I'm proposing a hypothesis here based on these observations that I would see these become different animals over time, and fossils and biology over time should tell me that this is actually true if my hypothesis of evolution is true. And even more so, the testable predictions would be in the fossil record, I would see transitional forms of these animals, changing from a giraffe to an elephant, per se, right? These are the things that he asks and we ask of ourselves. So we're going to see if this hypothesis should have ever even made it to a theory. We're gonna look at this. So what about the fossil record? Well, I'll tell you something that we've kind of learned. About 3,200 animals up through this, last year it was done was 2013. It's interesting that we stopped counting these. But we got over 3,200 animals and plants that have been identified as 2 million years old or greater in the fossil record that look identical to living fossils we see today, like horseshoe crabs, coelacanth, the nautilus or ammonites, the shrew. The elephant shrew actually was thought of in the 1800s to be an ancestor of the elephant. No, they're elephant shrews. They've always been, and that's what they are. So the first fossil record evidence we look at here is living fossils. There's too many of them to make a case for transitional. The next thing we have, it's kind of hard to read in red, and I apologize for that, is a statement by Stephen Jay Gould, who, when I was an evolutionist and I was in school, we read stuff by him, but he's somewhat of an honest atheist, an honest evolutionist. The bottom line here, he says, these complex forms of life, like our trilobites, right, with their compound eyes, 10 different features, see in low light, highlight, backwards, forwards, one of the most complex eyes in nature. Still we see this same type of eye in our horseshoe crabs of a living species today. That animal is in the Cambrian. He's at the lowest record of fossils. There are no transitions to him, but he shows up with these ridiculous eyes that can do amazing things, but he has no transitional species before him. And the fossil that's here behind this in the picture, you can see his little eyes here. I actually have that fossil with me, so we'll do that when we do the flood on Saturday, tomorrow. But he said, if this is true, the trade secret is all we have are tips and nodes of these trees. We do not have everything in between. They're missing. It's like these things just show up fully formed. And that's what the fossil record shows us. All or nothing. We're going to play the game of all or nothing. These animals, these creatures show up with everything working all at once in the fossil record. There are no transitions to them, but they show up with parallel, complex systems working in tandem. The barnacle. What's a barnacle do really well? Does anybody know? There's a good answer. They stick to stuff really good. They do. And where do they stick to stuff at? In underwater. Wait a minute. We've got an animal that sticks to stuff really good and it does it underwater. Wait a minute. Have you ever tried to glue something underwater? Okay. Let's talk about the design of this animal. I know, Jeff, you like the bombardier beetle. The barnacle is the bombardier beetle of the ocean. He shows up in the Cambrian. He's at the very bottom of our fossil record, no transitional species, and yet he secretes an oily lipid primer and a phosphoprotein, which is a two-part epoxy. He looks like this when he's a larva. There he is, swimming around, trying to figure out where he's going to live the rest of his life. And he knows not only does he select the right place where the most food is, he goes to work when he gets there, mixing up his two-part epoxy underwater, and in 3/10,000ths of an inch, his epoxy supports over 7,000 pounds of strength. He has no transitional species. He's in the fossil record at the very bottom, and he shows up with this kind of a system. Do you think he evolved into that? No. There is no record that anything ever evolved into this. There's no transition to it. And somehow he has just the right chemicals within his system and he has the right little jets to adhere them so he can stick to anything. 7,000 pounds of strength in 3/10,000ths of an inch underwater. Explain that one for me. This is an all or nothing animal. He has no history behind him. How about the egg? Somebody over here said they had chickens. Somebody raised chickens? Was there a chicken person here earlier? No? Okay. Eggs are amazing. The chicken egg is amazing. 10,000, check it out. Now, which came first, the chicken or the egg? The chicken did, of course. But think about how awesome the chicken is to lay an egg like this by design that has 10,000 pores in the egg, but they're arranged in such a way that it will intake up to 6 liters of oxygen over its 21 days and expel 4.5 liters of carbon dioxide and other gases out of the egg, but not let water in to destroy the animal that's growing. Or in such a structure that mama hen does not crush that egg. More importantly is what's inside the egg. What's inside the egg is just enough proteins and food and just the right cells in just the right combination for the little chick, the little animal, to grow over its 21-day period. And at the end of 21 days, its food is exhausted. But it happens to have an egg tooth that formed in that time frame, and it's ready to come out of the egg at the 21st day. Now I'm going to walk you through this and tell me how we could have ever gotten the first chick. All right? I kind of compare it to a SpaceX kind of mission where you have just enough oxygen, just enough water, what you need, so that you can execute the mission and come home. Okay? So, day one, we have the embryo begins. Remember, we've got just the right proteins, just the right food source, the right oxygen coming in. We've got the right structure of the egg to protect it from water and anything that would damage it. And we're expelling the harmful gases out of the egg through those 10,000 pores arranged just the right way. And so here he starts growing. Notice that the heart begins to beat on the second day, which is exactly what you need to start spreading out your blood vessels and your system that you'll need to create this little chick. He starts to grow all these things on the 5th day. Notice on the 7th day, he starts forming his egg tooth, or she does, right? Guess how many days it takes for an egg tooth to grow?
21.
Well, we're going to end up at 21 days. If he starts it on day 7, when do you think his egg tooth is ready? 14 more days, that's right. On the 21st day is what we have to have that, or we can't peck our way from the inside out of an egg. So system number 1 we're looking at here is the egg tooth. Now he has to form, and he has to be ready by 21 days, and everything has to go in proper sequence. And here we get to 18, and he has filled up his entire space, and he basically has about 2.5 to 3 days left to survive unless he gets out. And guess what starts happening? On day 20, he starts being able to peck a little bit. His egg tooth is ready. And on the 21st day, when all his resources are gone, all his space is gone, guess what he can do with his egg tooth? He can get out. What's everybody say? Oh, come on, man. And then you go to Chick-fil-A and, anyway. I'm just saying. Anybody a fan of that? I know I am. Okay. Tomorrow's lunch is Chick-fil-A, by the way, if you come for the Saturday presentation. So we'll enjoy him tomorrow. Does it strike you as some kind of ridiculous engineering for this animal to be produced in such a way, in such a capsule that protects it, keeps the moisture and everything out, that the oxygen can be drawn in at the proper rate, that everything can be expelled at the proper rate, Think about the design that went into this. What if the first egg didn't look like this? What would have happened to the first chick? No chick. Had to be that way from the beginning. What about these guys? Anybody ever seen any of these guys before? Come on, man. In your textbooks? Yes, that's right. Piltdown man. Piltdown man. Nebraska man, right? Neanderthal, which were, we thought they were, a caveman like the commercials we have, right? Or Lucy, who was supposedly something like a chimp that could walk upright, right? That's what we thought. We were told that. We were told that by National Geographic. I had it when I was a kid. I enjoyed that magazine. I thought, oh yeah, this is it. This is how monkeys become people, right? Right. So, but the problem is this now. Nobody's ever going back to the textbook and saying, hey, wait a minute, this guy forged a human jawbone and put chemicals on it to age it and make it look this way, and he actually went to jail for this guy in England. How about Nebraska man? Thanks to DNA, we found out in 1980 the teeth that they found that they built this whole proposition around were pig's teeth. 1980, but that's still in a textbook. Neanderthals, they're actually just humans. They're just humans with certain traits that are stronger, smaller, whatnot, a stockier build, right? But they were seeking shelter in groups and lived in caves or survived the Ice Age. And this group of people, we can still find their DNA today in the human population all over the world. These traits, they're human. They're not apes, and they're nothing in between. Lucy, we were told Lucy was a half ape, half man. She's something what they call Australopithecus, right? You heard that term. She's one of those. But it turns out that Lucy was just an extinct ape, kind of like a large chimp, and she happened to have died falling out of a tree. She's not a human. She's not half human. She's an ape. She's not part human. No, she's more like a chimpanzee than anything. But yet we're told, oh yeah, there's your transitional forms. So every one of these is not true. Every one of these. So we'll start with Australopithecus, which is Nancy or Lucy, and these others that have been found, and they are extinct apes. We have Neanderthals, what we found through DNA evidence now in the last 10 years. These are just humans with specific traits we find in the human population today. Heidelbergus and Erectus, both of these are fully humans. They're very much like Neanderthals, but we were told they were half and half. So guess what evolutionists did? They came up with a category called habilis. And if you hear this, what habilis is a bunch of fractured fossil bones and fragments that basically are either Australopithecus, which are extinct apes, or they're like Neanderthals, or these others like Heidelbergensis or some of these others that are actually just humans. So what they did is they took scraps from all over the place, and because they couldn't find a transitional form that was true, and said, here we go, we'll have a category which will be half human, half ape, this type of thing, and we'll put these all together. The trade secret is this is called the wastebasket or the grab bag by evolutionists, because if you can't find one, you get the parts from different places, you put them together, and you call it habilis, and this is pawned off as a transitional form of monkey to man. But none of this holds weight now that we have DNA and whatnot. It's toast. Not true, but you'll see this in your textbooks in biology and other places in paleontology if you study at the university. You ever heard this? You're 98% like a chimp. Is that true? What did genetics tell us? Well, it turns out on close analysis, the people that did this study several years ago, they basically took the traits that were similar from human and apes, such as 5 digits on hands and feet and 2 ears and 2 eyes and a nose. They took the common genes and they disregarded anything that wasn't. And so what they ended up doing was they ignored 18% of all chimp DNA and 25% of the human. They said, hey, you're 98% like a chimp. Well, yeah, if I chop off both ends of it and say, yes, that's the lie behind this one. But you still hear that today. Have you ever heard that before? Raise your hand if you've heard that before, that you're 98% genetically like a chimp. Not true. Not true at all. Okay, we've reviewed this earlier. We'll do it again. So Haeckel and Darwin and these guys, they come up with what's called the tree of life. The tree of life says these amoeba became lemurs, which became you somehow. And that's what they proposed. And that is a quote-unquote theory, a hypothesis that was kind of considered theory. But genetics tells us that no, what we see are kinds. Horses are horses. Bears are bears. Penguins are penguins. Elephants have always been elephants genetically. I'm going to show you the data here in just a second, right? But let's talk about genetics and let's watch a little movie on this. Check out what genetics is teaching us about what evolution's trade secrets are. Here we go.
Actually, I believe genetics is the most powerful argument against evolution. And the reason is that when you look at the genes of things, I mean, they're transmitted and passed on generation to generation. But the changes you see, the mutations, actually destroy the genes.
What biologist does is actually it studies the genetics, the genetic information, the transfer of genetic information, the control of genetic information, or in my field, biotechnology, how to change that intelligently to create something novel. Darwinism has nothing to do there. The random approach produces nothing. Randomness cannot compete with intelligence in understanding nature.
I organized a symposium at Cornell University, and the topic was biological information. And all of the scientists agreed on one thing, and that is that information is fundamental to our understanding of what life is. Information is, in a sense, what makes life life. And I'm not just talking about information like data. I'm talking about information networks, communication networks within the cell.
One of the most amazing information transfer systems in the cell involves the way proteins are encoded in and decoded from strands of DNA. Starting out with these long, fragile, sticky strings of DNA, an amazing machine called an RNA polymerase zips down the strand, opens up the coils, and copies the DNA into another molecule called RNA. And RNA uses a slightly different language convention. It still has 4 letters like DNA, but instead of A, C, G, and T, it has A, C, G, and U. The RNA then leaves the nucleus and another amazing machine attaches to it. It's called a ribosome, and it is in charge of translating from the language of the RNA with its 4 letter bases to the language of proteins with their 20 different amino acids. 3 bases on the bottom of the tRNA match to 3 letter groups in the RNA. On the other end are amino acids which pop off as they're attached to the growing protein strand. But the process isn't finished because most proteins need help folding properly. And that's facilitated by little molecules called chaperones. They attach to and protect the unfolded protein as it's transported to a watermelon-shaped molecule called a chaperonin, which folds the protein into its final form. From DNA to protein is an incredibly complex process that uses precise and complex machines to translate between 2 completely unrelated languages, the linear code of the DNA world to the 3-dimensional code of the protein world.
If we look into these complexities and into these codes in the genome and in the working together, the operating system in the cells, then it is very hard to exclude that there hasn't been intelligence behind it. And I think that is what the creationists recognize in these systems.
How did this incredible communication network that's even present in the simplest cell, how did it arise? Well, you need 3 things for it to arise. Number 1, you need a language. You can't even conceive of a communication system until there's a language, because there's senders and receivers in the cell. Secondly, you need communication channels or networks. It's a little bit like the hardware that enables the internet. And thirdly, you have to have meaningful information that is being translated into language and communicated through the channels of communication.
Information is at the heart of cellular function. Did you know the cell even has a post office? They're these specialized molecules called kinesins, and they're in charge of delivering packets of material to different parts of the cell. But in their journey, they go to pre-specified destinations. Without that addressing system, the cell couldn't even work.
Information, communication, and language. They're non-material entities. They arise through intelligence, and they're mutually defining. So you can't have one without the other. They all have to arise at the same time.
Okay, so did you catch the last thing he said about these being non-material entities? Is language material? Can it arise from a natural materialistic process? No, it cannot. Can not just the language, but the information that's in the language. Is there any natural process that can create information on its own? No. And there is no natural process that provides a non-material, immaterial function of communicating out of a natural process. None of those three things are natural. None of those things can arise from a natural process, and none of them are material. So the whole basis of information being passed from one place to the other to improve an animal through mutations and whatnot can't even happen through a natural process in and of itself. So there is something very serious to think about. So let's go back to our original tenet here. So we had Darwin's common descent. Do we think that these single-cell organisms became different types of animals and lemurs and became you? Well, here's what we know. Thanks to radio microscopes and seeing down in the atomic structures and molecules, we can actually see DNA now, these type molecules, and we see amoeba have their own DNA. Guess what amoebas have always been looking at their DNA? They've been amoebas the whole time. What about lemurs? They don't have any ancestral traits back in any other forms of life, so they are all in their same kind, and lemurs themselves have even been lemurs the whole time. Genetically, you guys, 99.9% genetically identical. You're the same kind. Can any one of you in the room marry somebody else in another part of the world, have kids, and those kids have kids? That means you're all the same kind. Get over it. Right? So, canines, the apes, birds, dinosaurs, frogs, newts, they all have their same kind, and they've always been that kind. So, common descent fails number one right out of the gate genetically. You did not come from an amoeba, and amoebas cannot create higher forms of life on their own, and they can't evolve into that. What about natural selection? This is where mutations are helpful, and somehow we became new animals, right, or new forms. Well, let's look at this. There's a couple of problems with this. Mutations can't create on their own more complexity. They usually lose complexity and lose information as far as going forward. But the problem is we have these mechanisms in the molecular machines like the bacterial flagellum, the propulsion system for bacteria, that have a clutch that rotate. This is, there's nothing below this molecularly. These things are nanomachines. They have a clutch. They have a rotator that goes 100,000 RPM. That's pretty fast, isn't it? Revolutions per minute. Do you know in a quarter turn they can stop the 100,000 RPM and go the opposite direction? Okay, everybody go get in your cars, drive down the freeway, right? Run it at 100,000 RPM and throw it in reverse. What's going to happen to the car? Exactly. These mechanisms can do that and reverse field with their propulsion and go the opposite direction in a quarter turn. 100,000 RPM, stop at a quarter turn, only moving a quarter turn back, and go the other direction and go the same RPMs again. At a nanomachine level, no ancestors, no mutations to get there. They're that way. They have U joints, they're liquid cooled, acid propelled. What about bats? They show up in the fossil record with these incredible ecosystems. Do you know a bat can fly around at night without any light at all and using sounds, and the sounds returning to their ears in an ecosystem, and can find 1,000 mosquitoes an hour and eat them by sound? You think that happened by chance? So, I think the first, 100,000 or so bats must have been really hungry, right? Or they, found something else to eat, if that's true. But they don't. They show up just like this with their magnificent design. The bombardier beetle. 2 chemicals combine in 2 different tanks in the back of this animal. They combine to produce 200-degree spray to either kill its prey or to chase off a predator that's trying to get them. What if those 2 chemicals weren't exactly the right chemicals for the very first bombardier beetle? What would have happened? He'd have blown himself up, wouldn't he? What if those tanks weren't just the right shape? What if the nozzles mixed them on the other side of the animal, not out the back side of the animal? There'd be no more bombardier beetle. These are all or nothing type situations which natural selection cannot answer. Elephants, we talked about them earlier. All of these animals show up in the record with all these features. None of them have beneficial mutations that got them there. They showed up this way. Urey and Miller's experiments. You guys are too young to remember this stuff, but you'll still see it in textbooks. This guy took methane, ammonia, and hydrogen and other situations, electricity, to create what he thought were the first building blocks of life. What's the problem already with this experiment if you're going to explain life on Earth? Methane, ammonia, and hydrogen gases. Where does that exist in Earth? Never has. Your atmosphere is basically almost all nitrogen with about 20% oxygen and a few other gases, argon, helium. So this never existed on Earth. The experiment from the very beginning was flawed. That's not viable to create life. And then we have the other evidences that we see about natural selection that kind of put the kibosh on it. Salmon, euryhaline, they can handle a lot of salt, and they can handle a variation in salt levels. Thus, salmon can do, what do? They come from the ocean and they can go into fresh water and they can go back out. That's what they can do. Their bodies were designed to do that. A few years ago, some of these salmon in Michigan got into Lake Michigan and couldn't get out. So guess what happened genetically? The traits in these animals turned to more of a stenohaline, a very low salt type system. And so these animals genetically gave up information and triggered into a very narrow band of salt and water to survive. And their children became that, and they mutated to this type of salmon. But guess what happened when the great-grandchildren tried to go back to the ocean? They died because the mutations gave them a short-term gain, but a long-term extinction to go back to salt. So when you mutate, you give away information to become a Pomeranian pup, right? You can never go back and be a wolf again. You see what I'm saying? You lose information through mutations. So bears, polar bears are a good example. They genetically mutated to survive in the cold and eat a lot more protein and fats and eat seals and things, right? But what happens, can they ever go back to the brown bear and eat berries and have a diet like that and survive? No. So guess what's happening to polar bears as the environment changes? They go extinct. They mutated to survive short term, but they're losing the ability to go backward. Now, if you get some polar bears and brown bears together and they have cubs, kind of beige bears, if you will, right? Can the polar bears ever get back to being a full brown bear again? They can never get back. They've lost that information. That's the harm of mutation. Here's the last, and it was actually written in one of Darwin's memoirs. He said, you know what? Gratuitous beauty is probably the best argument against natural selection. You know what I see when I see this peacock? Come and eat me if you're a coyote, right? There's no natural selection advantage, survival of the fittest, if you're a peacock and you look like this in the wild. Whales becoming bears is something else that's taught. But we know well, it is. If you get to college and you see some biology books, you'll actually be taught this. That's what's out today. Whales have always been whales genetically. Bears have always been bears genetically. Don't let them try and bait and switch you on kinds becoming other kinds. Okay, so we know natural selection's out because mutations don't create a new creature, and they certainly don't even create a beneficial situation for the creature. They actually go extinct over time if they've mutated. And so we're left with adaptation. Well, we talked about dogs. How many different kinds of dogs are there? Those are adaptation of a kind. All right, most of them have been intentionally mutated to look a certain way. Who has a dog? Raise your hand. What kind of dog do you have, man? He has a Schnauzer. Who else? Raise your hand if you got a dog. Over here. Yes, back in the back. What kind of dog do you have? A Dachshund? A Dachshund Corgi mix. See, there you go. Okay. All right. Are they both dogs? How can she have a Dachshund Corgi mix? Because Dachshunds and Corgis can what? They can mate and have children. They can have children. Pups, they can have pups. So they're the same kind. Do you see what a kind is? Here's what a kind, well, let's finish this. Adaptation we would agree with. But we don't agree that it becomes a new creature. We just see variation within the kind. We see species. So here's what it looks like. What's a kind? It's when mom and dad have babies, they can have babies, but it typically manifests itself in the family or below in our textbooks as we would look at it today. This is what God and the Bible defines as a kind, and that's exactly what we see. And we used to use this terminology. When we would just communicate our kind, humankind, mankind, right? And here it is. One small step for a man, but one giant leap for 1969. That's the way we refer to ourselves, as mankind or humankind, right? You're all the same. You're all the same. And genetically, we see these trees, this orchard of life more so than we do anything else. So therefore, we would agree that adaptation is true, but don't let them trick you and say that adaptation is going to lead to some kind of new animal, because it appears that God designed into these creatures the ability to adapt, to survive, but they don't change kind, and they certainly don't become new animal types. Okay, so we'll go back to our original statement. Did the finch beaks change that Darwin observed? Yes. Did those evolve into some new form of life? No. What were they still? They were still finches. All right, wait. Let's ask this question, testable hypothesis. Do the fossils and genetics and all bear out that these things turned into a different kind of an animal? No, they never turned into a different animal. So therefore, we never really left the hypothesis stage with Darwinian evolution. But yet it's taught as a theory. It's not even a good hypothesis. What about transitional forms? Okay, so it's been a long time, so surely we'll find transitional forms in the fossil record. Did we ever find any true transitional forms? No, we haven't. How about, is any of the other testable evidence true? And if not, we're supposed to learn from this and create another hypothesis. Has there ever been another hypothesis beyond Darwinism in that sect? No. It hasn't ever been changed. It's still being promoted as somehow a theory that's viable. It's not viable. It's not scientifically proven. So what's behind it all? Hang with me just a minute longer. In his own writings, he says, look, we got to get these kids away from God, because if they start thinking that they were created on purpose, for a purpose, then we'll lose them. We won't be able to control them with a theory that we are setting up. Actually, you're going to see here why he was setting it up, that would give them some advantage. What was his first book titled? The Origin of Species. But what's this subtitle right here? Can you guys read that, anybody? The Preservation of Favored Races. Races. Where did races come from? Where did this term races even come from? It came from evolution. Why would you think that this would be promoted by these people that are Darwinian evolutionists? I'm going to tell you why. It was used in the Constitution of the Confederate States as reference, as supporting text for the slave movement and whatnot before the Civil War. This is a fascinating statement that he made, which is the savage races, is what Darwin wrote in The Descent of Man. The savage races are anybody who is non-white European. That's what he said, and he said those people are inferior due to evolutionary traits. This was his belief system, right? And Hitler's going to go ahead and use it to exterminate 6 million Jews later during World War II. Do you see where evolution goes? If you believe that the survival of the fittest, and that you aren't all the same kind, but there are somehow these evolutionary things going on, and hey, I've evolved farther than you, so I'll just take what you've got because I'm going to survive and you're not. Do you see where evolution leads? It leads to death and destruction. It's a lie. So Darwin himself said, you know what, near the end of his life, writing to Charles Lyell, hey, I just feel like I'm living to make blunders here. Everything I'm doing is just turned into mud. Okay, this is the state of his mind. He then considered these questions on the human eye and how it has to have been developed all at the same time to function. He says, guys, I confess it's absurdity in the highest degree that could ever happen through a natural process, that you could get a human eye. Lastly, why, if species have descended from other species, one kind to another, am I not finding these innumerable transitional forms in the fossil record? And he said that in 1880 before his death. He knew his theory, his hypothesis was false. But what was driving him? Hate, man. He was a racist. That's basically what evolution leads to and where it came from. That's where we get the concept of this. So what does the evidence say about evolution that you are going to hear about when you go to college? What's the evidence say? Is it true? Are you feel better prepared to defend yourselves that a common ancestor, you know, that you've come from a single cell? Is that possible? Did that happen genetically? No, never did. How about natural selection? Do animals through mutations get better and bigger and stronger and change into different kinds of animals? Has that ever happened? No. Do you know what Romans 1:20 says? It says that the invisible things of the Lord are clearly seen in the creation, so that people looking at this and seeing his divine attributes and all these things being made are without excuse. The more we learn about genetics, The more we get into the molecular and the atomic levels, the more we learn about how all the information sciences that are being discovered within your bodies, within your cells, the more we know we're all the same kind. We know we're not, we may look different, but we're 99.1% the same person. And you and somebody else anywhere can marry and have children. We're all the same kind. And there has been no evolution since the very beginning. You've always been a human. That's what we know. Questions. I hate being the guy right after lunch because I had the chicken Alfredo too. Okay, I get it. Okay. How do I rate the Alfredo? Well, it was actually not really kind of an Alfredo. I think it was awesome, but it kind of had a chicken base to it, and I really liked that. So the flavor was great. You know, it's not what we would expect, right, if we heard the term Alfredo.
Okay, you got a question here. Now, we can get questions from Dave over here in the red sweater.
Dave,
okay,
come on
go.
up here.
Wait a minute. Okay. Do we have a place for all this information in one place?
Yeah, man. Heck yeah. You can actually see a presentation just like this one on our website anytime you want to see it. It's at genesisacademy.net. Click on the evolution icon. Or if you click on first and second laws, you can see Dave talk about that. Or dinosaurs. And other materials are there too on our resource.
Right on the homepage. His presentation's right on the homepage. Genesis Academy squished together.net. There's a bunch of stuff on there. Okay, another question. Ladies, come on, let's go. You got something, Shirley, here. Anybody? No? You ready to leave?
Hey, Steve, there's a bunch of information from creationist groups. Institute of Creation Research, they've got a number of things. Creation Ministries, Inc. It has a bunch of stuff. They've got a lot of information. We give out some books with our course called Like the Global Flood by John Morris and others. There's some good information out there, stuff that I learn from every time I read.
Are we providing resources for the course that starts tonight or tomorrow? No, but we'll give you links to that stuff. There are two sites that I think you guys really enjoy. One is called Genesis Apologetics. You'll see some of their material used in our flood stuff. A lot of that was done by Baumgartner, and it's really solid scientific material. The other would be the Illustra Media folks. And on our website, on our resource page, look at creation videos and other videos. The genetics video you saw and some other stuff, it's there too. And the fellow there that runs that organization, his name is Ladd Allen. He's a partner of ours. He'd love for you guys to use that content any way that you need to.
Okay, questions? Got anybody?
Jeff in the back, anyway.
Okay, we have a question here. They're not ready to go back to class yet.
No, don't go back.
I will. I'll say it loudly. Okay, the question is, have you ever shown this information to other scientists and people?
Yeah, well, actually...
And what was the reaction of these
people? Actually, we're evolutionists converted, so you're talking to people that were, okay? Actually, one of the guys I worked with when we first did the evolution one was, he said, "Look, take all the Bible stuff out of it and just go use the scientific method. If you can prove to me with the scientific method that it's false, then I'll listen to you." And so that's why we did what we did with this presentation. There were no verses in this presentation. Just me saying them every once in a while.
I used to be a city commissioner in Lawrence, Kansas, and because of my Christian convictions and stands on certain subjects, the university professors went after me. I gave a lecture up there, and there are physics professors there, so I got invited to the physics society up there, and they went after me a couple times. The trouble is I think these people live in a silo. They're what I call inbreds, intellectual inbreds. They suffer from incest, intellectual incest, and so they don't think outside the box. And so
hold on, let me bail Dave out. What he means is these guys only talk to themselves. They never get out of the bubble, right? Well, we were not we were not young Earth creationists. We were evolutionists. We're coming to you with arguments, knowing the argument from the other side. Okay, that's the difference between this presentation you probably just saw and one you would hear, from a typical Christian organization.
What happened was
Go ahead.
after about 2 or 3 sessions like this, where they went after me like a biting sow, the students are all laughing, and so now I can't get any debates up there at the university level because Kansas University anyway, because they're all afraid that they will get laughed out of the place, and that's the trouble. It's just they're not thinking. They're not thinking. They're all committed to this, and if you listen to all of these guys, I don't care if it's in evolution or if it's in cosmology, the universe, and everything, these people are promoting one thing: atheism. They just cannot accept, and they come up with these crazy ideas. And you get up there and you just explain it to the students, and it just turns into a laughing stock.
There's one other factor in this, and that's called money. If you don't toe the line on evolution, you get no funding from a lot of sources like the government and people. You get cut out. And so a lot of it's about money as well. And so you want to stay in the profession, you want to be a professor at a university, you better teach and believe evolution, or you're not going to stay there. They let people go that believe what you're hearing here. And there are all kinds of examples of that around. Question and comment in the back, or question, Mr. Jeff.
Jeff, go.
So over the years, I'm constantly trying to re-look at the age of the earth and where certain things fit in, and as I listen to different talks and folks, I'm adjusting it. So, as a reference to the flood, the Ice Age, say the Tower of Babel, those 3 big items,
Right.
the order they would fit in the approximate age they would fit in, would be monumental.
What about the age of the earth, and take into consideration the flood, ice age, and
We're going to do those in our.
We're going to do this conference this weekend, starting here at 6:30 tonight. We're going to do 2 sessions, and we're going through Genesis 1 through 11, and then tomorrow we'll have 4 sessions, and we'll deal with the Ice Age, the age of the universe, radiometric methods, the Tower of Babel.
but he's, I think, asking about how many years are we talking about here if we're young earth creationists, about what to what?
I went from about 13.7 billion years, which is commonly taught out there, to I think that the universe is less than 8,000 years old, and from a scientific point of view. And it sounds crazy, but you get up there and you talk to these people in a debate or something like this, they melt down. I don't care if it's here, in China, or in Russia, or in Ukraine, wherever it is. You get up there and they don't have their facts. I don't have to change any of the facts. The facts are all out there. You just explain to them the way things are, whether it's carbon-14 dating, uranium dating, the stars, the burning out of the stars, etc. You just deal with the facts. I don't have to change any of the facts. They just sorted them wrong to support their party line, and they have to change every cosmology. You're going to get a new theory every 2 to 7 years because the models are all wrong, and so they have to keep turning them over and patching them up and trying to make them fit, and they just don't fit.
Okay, question back there? Yeah. Oh, or were you just, yeah, go.
Were you just stretching, man? It's
Or are
cool.
you just stretching there? You got a question? What?
No, mammoths did not. They're the same kind of animal, mammoths, but they went extinct. Why did mammoths go extinct, Dave?
We're also going to deal with that question.
Yes, that's
Why did
yes.
these big animals disappear? Like we know that there were 100-ton dinosaurs. Mammoths were about 12, 15 tons. In fact, I have a vertebra that I just gave to Kevin that we dredged up, brought it up, and it's twice as big as the largest there's in the Swope Park Zoo in Kansas City. They have a 5-ton elephant in relief. They taxiderm it, showing the vertebra. This vertebra is not even the largest one we think in the mammoth, and it's twice as big as any of those. They couldn't breathe in present atmosphere. The pterodactyls couldn't fly. There's not enough air density here. So even they mentioned here that it's obvious that the atmosphere was different before, a lot more dense, and we'll get into that.
Before the flood.
Before the flood, and after the flood, it's gone, and so they can't breathe.
Yeah, the pre-flood world. We know this from the coal seams, right? We only have 3% of what we find in the fossil record. So I want you to imagine the forests, all the forests on the earth. This is scientifically validated, right? What we see on the earth is 3% of what was here before the flood. So imagine 97% is missing of the forests and the trees and things that used to be here before the flood. Okay? And so with all that vegetation, we know from the coal seams, we know from amber bubbles that have been extracted that we had 32% oxygen prior to the flood in the atmosphere. We have about 20 now. So if you have that much more pressure, that much more vapor, that much more water, that much more oxygen, your animals could have a nostril the size of a 50-cent piece and be a 100-ton animal and survive. But they couldn't survive after the flood, some of these animals, when they got to a certain size. That might be the mammoth problem. The other part of the mammoth is they were living in fields, hay fields basically, grass fields, and eating. And then the snows came and of the ice age right after the flood and took them out.
Yeah, the big animals just disappeared afterwards. You have to have a certain amount of oxygen. That's what Hannibal learned when he tried to go attack Rome, train over the mountains. They just can't take the air. You, for instance, you're great athletes. You get up to the top of Pikes Peak and you're breathing like crazy to try and keep your breath up. I've been up to the top of Pikes Peak. I haven't raced up it, but others did. And you just run out of oxygen up there. Well, if the atmosphere was heavier before, the pterodactyls have the air lift. They got the metabolism to pump those 30-foot wingspans. And the mammoths could go around where, but afterwards only elephants. The largest animal we can support is about a 6-ton elephant in our present atmospheric pressure. Now, if it was a lot higher, yeah, you bring a 30-ton whale up on shore, and what will it die of? It'll get its lungs and everything. Does it breathe the oxygen? Yeah. You can water it down. It'll die of asphyxiation. There's not enough air pressure to keep it going. See, our lungs only go up as a square of our size, but our volume goes up as the cube, and so you just run out of size. Now, if there's a higher, say the atmosphere was 10 times greater than now, then yes, these big animals can live. But afterwards, that wasn't. After the flood, that came down. The waters above that gave this heavy atmosphere disappeared, and so the animals, they all disappeared too, the big animals.
Okay, Dr. Lindstedt wants us to break down that 6,000 to 8,000 year range. So let's talk about from the creation to the fall, or let's say creation to the flood. How many years? Kind of in round numbers.
Okay, let's work backwards. We're 2,000 years from Christ, okay? You go back 2,000 years from that, you get to the birth of Abraham. And then back, there's a question.
So that's 4,000.
4,000, yeah. But you have a question between our Bible's translated off the Masoretic text. There's some questions because the Septuagint, which was translated 300 years before Jesus out of Hebrew into that, gives longer periods of time. So I'm going to take the maximum. So you end up from the time of his birth back to the flood.
From Abraham back to the flood.
You've got, well, in one case it's 352 years. The other way you end up with 1,300 years.
Okay, so 5,000 give or take.
Yeah, and according to the Masoretic text, from the flood back to Adam is 1,656 years. But they cut out 600 years, so it's 2,200 years back. So you're looking at something that's less than 8,000 years old.
Just depending on which text you use.
Yes.
Okay.
So
that help?
There's one other question within that, which is when the tower was, and from Peleg's, his name meaning division. From that time frame, we can calculate very closely, at least genetically even, where the breakdown of the peoples were, because people actually, I know some of you guys won't hear the tower presentation tomorrow, so I'll give you just a little bit of that. So it's an interesting study, secular study, that shows us that genetically we bottlenecked at this about 4,500 year or 4,600 year ago period, in which we were down to 3 females that produced daughters, and that tells us our human population bottlenecked at that point in time, because we can see genetically that now. We can see mitochondria leave all the way back to about 6,000 years. So that's when we think the first humans were. This is secular science. This is how John Sanford became a believer, actually, doing the Human Genome Project with stuff like this. But you ladies have one of 3 markers that you're carrying forward, and we're carrying forward mitochondrial markers that we're carrying forward into all females on the earth. So what were the 3 girls that would have been alive that were this bottleneck 4,300 to 4,500 years ago? Who were they? Yeah, Noah's daughters-in-law. And guess what they must have had? They must have all had at least one daughter that carried it on, because all of you ladies have one of those markers. Us guys, we don't carry that forward, but they do, and we do together, right? Okay, the other question was, for Jeff, your favorite insect has got to be these 3-foot wingspan dragonflies. How did they get that big? Well, because they had so much more oxygen, so much more air pressure, so much more perfect environment for them to live in. For insects, and you guys know this. If you see a huge cockroach run across the floor, how old is that cockroach? He's older than the other cockroaches you see, isn't he? Why is that? Because they grow till they die. That's why. How about if you catch a fish and it's a big fish? He's pretty old fish, isn't he? Right? Because they grow till they die. That's how these animals and these insects are. So what you had are perfect conditions, longer lifespans, a lot of radiation is sheltered from them with more moisture, canopy type things, or pressure in the air, a lot more deflection of gamma rays. So these animals and insects lived a lot longer. And the air pressure was we had at least 32% oxygen. You guys ever see, a running back on the sideline after a play, getting his oxygen, get ready, go back in the game, get his oxygen back up in his blood system? Right, so that you can produce, that can get to your muscles and you can accelerate, right? Well, just imagine if you had 32% oxygen instead of 20 today. You wouldn't run out of breath. You could run faster, do greater things. That's what this affects insects especially. They breathe through holes in their sides called spiracles, and these dragonflies got huge, 2.5-foot wingspan. How'd you like to see one of those fly by? That is good. Those animals are gone. Those insects are not. It's not possible for them to live in this environment in these conditions. That's all gone. But you can see from the creation of the tower there in Eridu, where we think it was, which is in modern day Iraq, but in Eridu, the platform seems to be there. And that's kind of where these linguistic studies take us back to this area. And as they broke out in languages, we see genetic groupings of people. And we see mutations of people, like people from India, a lot of high diabetes traits and things like that. And so we don't have races of people. We just have different people groups that have cloistered together based on language. And those two things go together. And it's a fascinating study to track language with genetic entropy and genetic mutations. And guess what happens today? You go to New York and you go to Little Italy and everybody speaks Italian and they hang out together. If we go to Miami, there's Little Havana. If we go to San Francisco and Chinatown, or we go up into Milwaukee and Minnesota, what do we see? We see Germantown, Pennsylvania. We see, people cloister together based on language, right? And so over time, those traits get magnified. And so it's just like in dogs. We see Cocker Spaniels and German Shepherds, and because they've been bred together, and those traits come out. But they're still dogs, and we're still humankind. Okay?
One more question right back there. One more. This is it. Go. are we getting flagged and stuff taken off of the web?
Oh,
He's
yeah.
our he's
Let
our
me
yeah,
let me hand
yeah.
it over. See, he was one of
my
the media gurus for Sprint. He doesn't tell you that, but he's one of those wizards, and he's gotten hit numerous
Yeah.
times.
I-
Tell
I-
him how
all
much.
right,
How
okay,
much
all
you
right.
started out with just a few people, and
Oh yeah,
40
okay,
million.
Okay, so I worked on search engine technology when it first arrived, and I worked with some really smart people, and we got a lot of patents and stuff on algorithms for search engines and things and how they operate. Okay, so we started off our social media program, and we used to do, I don't know, 1 million impressions or whatever on our social media platform, and all of a sudden it just was turned off. And so Twitter was one of our first that we saw the shadow banning and all of that, and we lost a ton of impressions and followers, and were blocked. And so we've tried different things since then. It's way better now than it used to be, but it's just now starting to pick up again for us. But yeah, we've dealt with a lot of banning and shadow banning, and even just blocking our content.
Well, tell him what it grew to from just a few starts.
Oh yeah, well yeah, we hit several million impressions per month on all our platforms, but at one time we got really high really fast, and then we got knocked way down to almost nothing, and making a comeback now on some platforms.
We almost had 50 million at one point after only 3 years, and then all of a sudden everything starts.
Yeah, it was turned
started
off.
hitting us, trying to shut us off and
Yeah,
everything.
yeah, it's true.
Okay, before I give this back over to Dr. Lindstedt, let's have a round of applause for that evolution presentation.
Thank
again.
you guys. Thank you. Thank you guys for your attention. Appreciate you.
I think an important point is one of the things that I hope you learn how to do in high school is to take information and to sort through information and then come to conclusions. And we were talking to a young lady that graduated here recently and was at a university. It's even supposed to have a Christian background, and they were attacking her because she's a creationist. And so it can even happen at a so-called Christian university. Not all Christian universities believe in creation. And yet, at the same time, I think one of the things that you were mentioning concerning the flood, think about how reasonable this is. How does everything come back to approximately the date of the flood? Is that an accident? Or did the flood really occur? And think about the changes that took place. And I think the question that Darius asked concerning mammals, and I don't want to overlook that, because remember the Bible just gives a small detail. And where did the water come from for the flood? Part of it was rain. Part of it was bubbling up from underneath. But it certainly destroyed the canopy. And so go back and make a list of the ages that everybody lived after the flood. And what you find is, going into the flood, there were people that were living 800 years, 900 years, almost 1,000. So you have a flat line like this, let's say at 900. After the flood, exponentially it goes down, and it comes to David, and David's 70. Okay, and that exponential curve is exactly what occurs in nature. And what does it show? It shows that there was a protection that was in that canopy that the Bible said collapsed when the flood occurred. So it affected lifespan. It affected animals that could live. Think about how reasonable that answer is. And because I think that question that asked concerning mammals, that's one of the pressing questions. That's kind of the light on or light off. And once you see that, once that's done, now the size of animals has gone down. Okay, why? They can't breathe. Okay, so when we start talking about dinosaurs that are 100 tons, and we can support that with an atmosphere that they can generate with a model before the flood, and now we can barely generate a model that can support a 6-ton animal today is big. In those days, a 100-ton animal was possible. You know, so little statements from the Bible make it so that we begin to understand this is how things are going. Okay, it goes back to something really important. That's the second law. Okay, and that's energy goes downhill. Things are becoming more disordered. And so when you see, when we go all the way out here to prophetic things, and people say, okay, we're getting better and better, and we're going to bring in the kingdom of God, do you think we're getting better and better? Yeah, that's why you don't have to put locks on your lockers. That's why Walmart just put a sign up this afternoon and said, help yourself and make your own change in the drawer. The car dealership did that, said, the keys are on the desk, pick out your car and make payments as you will, because we're getting better and better. I'm kidding, that's not true. Yeah, you will pay money at Buff and Stuff when you go. You pay for the lunch line. Why? We're not getting better and better. We're on our way downhill. Okay. Wow, I think this information is so good and so important for you to digest. Now, you can be intimidated because you go in a classroom and you might look around and say, no one else believes this. Well, you know what? When you take a stand, you're going to probably find out that other people do believe this, but they were afraid to take a stand. And so sooner or later, you got to be brave enough to say, you know what? I believe the Bible record. And I'll just let the chips fall where they may, because you'll be picked on for your beliefs, and that just makes us stronger. I was talking to the elite guys, and we were talking about the fact: do you like to go into a visiting gym? I love it. I love it when the home team comes out there, and everybody's cheering for them, and we go out there, and there's just the coaches and us. I love it. You want to know why? That atmosphere is so much fun. Yeah. And so you don't want everyone to agree with you, do you? Yeah. Hey, here's why. Peggy, you don't want everyone to agree with you. Here's why. This is your opportunity to win people to Christ. This is the very thing that God allows us to do to show them truth. And so I hope we take this opportunity to become strong in our faith, to examine, question one another, provoke one another. You know what? It's fine to say to Dave, I doubt what you say. Make him prove it. It's okay. That's what seminars like this are for. All right. And I'm going to give you a chance for more questions because I see you talking to each other, and I have a feeling that some of those are questions that, yeah, okay. On the back row. What was the atmosphere before the flood? Oh, what color was the atmosphere before the flood?
Yeah, I don't know what it was. It's blue today, but the blueness in the atmosphere is very interesting. It's due to refraction coming through. But I don't know if you do this, but as you go up, like when they shoot the rockets to the moon, as you get up to about 12 miles or so, it starts turning dark. In fact, it turns black up there, and you don't have the color in the atmosphere. But our atmosphere is pretty shallow. Yeah. When you look at it, we call it a biozone. It's about 100 feet down, and then it goes up to about I think it's about 18,000 feet. You go into the death zone when you're climbing Mount Everest. Once you go above that, your body starts dying. And so we live in we're in a protected zone in the universe. We're protected children. We can walk around without a spacesuit on, and that's the only place in the universe you're going to do that.
I know Carl Ball. I think you know who Carl Ball is. Yeah. And Carl Ball looks at the atmosphere, and he says pre-flood, he thinks that God's favorite color is pink. and so he does that through some of the pressure changes and so on that took place there. I have that in a book, but I don't know his calculations. Yes?
What are your opinions on like bringing the mammoths back with cloning or elephant eggs and such?
Oh yeah, the question is can you do like a Jurassic Park? Take genetic. The problem is we can collect even off of the T-Rex and these things we can collect what's called the mitochondrial DNA, but it's not nuclear DNA, and you can't create, and nuclear DNA degenerates very quickly. We can't create animals off of mitochondrial DNA. It's not sufficient to recreate. They've tried to take some things and plant them in living animals. These things genetically, you pull it out and put in the cells, this stuff, but it won't grow into that animal.
Mr. Smith?
We talked about building pre-flood models with the different amounts of, like 32% oxygen compared to 20%. Is that being done by anyone to prove that we could, sustain life that was a 100-ton animal compared to a 6-ton animal?
We have used, let me tell you an interesting thing about this pressure. It has to do more with pressure than percentage of oxygen. You get too high on the oxygen and everything explodes. That was the problem we had on the Apollo, I think it was 1, where the guys were on the pad, Grissom, White, and Chaffee, and it was pure oxygen, and something ignited, and it flash burned them. You can't have too much more than 30% oxygen. What we have done, they have places where you can do surgery. They call them hyperbaric pressures. They pump the pressure up, and you'll heal much quicker. They discovered this with divers down, that they had wounds, and they were down underwater in these pressure chambers, and they healed a lot faster. We don't understand why that hyperbaric pressure makes things heal much faster. They have them for convalescence after surgery and also for conducting surgery in these high pressure deals. And the health, there's some health reasons that people are a lot more healthy in those atmosphere. We don't know. You don't change the percentage of oxygen, you just increase the pressure. And that's what we'd have to do to have these larger animals. But we can't do it. We can't change the atmospheric pressure.
Actually, the hyperbaric pressure chambers right now, our friends in the Bahamas are using those because the divers are spending too much time under the water. And so as a result of that, their body's deteriorating. And if they go into the hyperbaric chambers just an hour or so a day, they can get their strength back again. There's some of this going on even in professional athletes. I don't know how wide it's reported, but there's some that we have laws in this country that are prohibiting that medically, but they're going overseas and they're actually taking their blood. They do a transfusion using their own blood. They're enriching it with oxygen. They're putting it back in. They're flying back here. They're playing, and their performance the week after they get their own blood transfused back in their body with elevated oxygen levels, it's incredible. You can see they're jumping a half inch more than they normally do, all because of enriched oxygen in their blood level and pressure. And so, so they're dabbling with this, but
they call it doping.
Yeah.
That guy that was the championship bicycler in the world, what he was doing is take his own blood out and kept generating more blood. And then before the races, he dumped his own blood back into his system, so he had a higher percentage of deals, so he could assimilate more oxygen. And he was winning all the races, and they finally found out that he was cheating by doping. Yeah. They call it doping.
There's an athlete, I won't mention the Lakers by name, very good athlete, and he's about to break a scoring record, and he's doing this at the present time. I have a theory that that's what allows you to do math problems really well, and so I'm going to try to do some doping of some, no.
Yeah, you got it.
Yes.
Can you speak to how the geology changed with the flood, and because the scientists say, it took millions of years to form this canyon wall.
That's an interesting deal. It's obvious if you look at the geological layers, all you have to do is go through a cut, and those things are very clear seams. If something had been there for a long time, you'd have erosion before the next one was laid on top. They're laid down very clearly. I own some land up on the Missouri River in 2011. They had a flood up there, and they dumped about 200,000 tons of sand on my property. But if you go out and look at it, it's just very smooth like that. There's very few organic things or things trapped in it. So these things, these animals that are fossils were trapped quickly. And then these layers, if you'll see them, some of them are bent like this. You go out in Colorado Springs and you'll see in the Garden of the Gods, these things, they were bent when they were soft. You can't bend hard rock, it'll fracture. So all these things from geology you're looking at, said this all happened in a very short amount of time.
I think maybe she was asking what it was like before the flood, vegetation-wise, and then afterward, like what we see now.
Okay, what we think from the Genesis account is that there weren't really any mountains much before the flood, and the seas were fairly shallow, and there was a lot of them very green and everything. What happened in the flood, we think we have the same amount of water in our oceans that we had in the flood, but what happened was when this rain came down, but like he says, the fountains of the deep bursting forth, they overrun. I don't know if you know that there's not sedimentary layers out in the oceans. It's only on the continents. So there were tsunamis and things rolling over and depositing these deposits we call geological layers in a very short amount of time. And you don't have it in the oceans because the water's not moving across in the oceans. And so these were built up, and then they ran to the low places and shoved the other ones up, like he talked about those clams that were buried alive up on the top of Mount Everest.
They didn't hear this.
Oh yeah, on Mount Everest, you got clams. Clams, when they die, they open up. If they're buried alive, they're closed because they can't open up. They died that way. Well, these clams all over the world, most of them aren't opened. You only see those on seashores and things where they died. But on Mount Everest, you're at what, 29,000 feet? Clams up there? Like Kevin says, those were, what do you call those?
Mountain climbers.
Mountain climbers and things. But you say, how did this happen? They were in the sea, and they're up there at almost 5 miles above, more than 5 miles above the sea level. They got shoved up there. There's a lot of tectonic changes, a lot of volcanic action, and we'll talk about that. The ice age that followed the flood was very apparent, and it lasted for a period of time and then disappeared.
Matter of fact, you mentioned the tectonics and the plates, and again, we go back to the flood, and the whole theory of tectonics in the plates, it's really boundary layers.
Right.
And how those boundary layers slide together. I attended a conference a few years ago on boundary layer plates, and wow, you know what? We can go right back to the flood, approximate time of the flood. That's when the boundary layers shifted. That's when the continents came as they are right now, and it all dates back. A flood at the right Bible time is necessary to make the tectonic plates come exactly as they are now.
And also the Ice Age. The Ice Age, I don't know, in Lawrence, Kansas, I dredge. I have a dredging company. We dredge out sand and gravel, and that's where we pump some of this fossils, like the stuff from the dinosaurs, the mammoths and things. But it came down as far as Lawrence, Kansas. Do you know what that means? That means that at Lawrence, Kansas, in the middle of August, you had ice on top of it. And the final push, they call the moraine, is south of Lawrence about 10 miles. So we have these big chunks, some of them bigger than houses, of glaciers that are brought from Minnesota. We don't have any quartzite around here. All we have is limestone. These glaciers carried these big things. They're rounded. Some of the biggest houses, they're quartzite stone. You'll see them in northern Kansas. Farmers have them out in their fields in front of their houses. These were carried down from 700 miles down to us, because the glacier will move on a fairly flat plain because ice under pressure at the bottom turns to water. Like you see someone skating out there, they're not skating on ice, they're skating on water, because when that pressure changes under the skate to water, and so they're going around. The glaciers came down there, and finally the oceans start to warm up, cool off, and you don't have the storms, and then you have the glaciers receded, and they dumped this water, and that's what's formed the Kansas River and the Missouri River, Mississippi rivers, as there, and deposited these deposits of, remains of T-Rexes and mammoths and these other things in the residue as they backed off and melted and moved back north.
I'm going to get you, but I think Mrs. Keeley has something. Okay. Yep. Darius. What did he say?
What'd you have? Dragons. I think that Kevin talked about that. He says that what we call dinosaurs. Dinosaurs is a new name. It didn't exist before about I don't know what 1860s. Yeah. Before that it was all dragons, and dragons did exist. They were dinosaurs. You know, they're big animals, and there were dragon slayers. Beowulf. Have you ever read Beowulf? Any of that stuff? In any of your deals? Some of the deals. St. George the Dragon Slayer. These guys made money. They were knights that went around slaying these animals to get rid of them. And there are probably some that still exist in the seas. Japanese, not too long ago, I think it's 20 years ago, brought up an animal that's a plesiosaurus. It's about 2-ton animal with a head down and was in the sea, and it was dead. It had died. But it had been alive not too long before. They caught it in their nets, and they dumped it back because it smelled so bad. But like one guy said, where there's one of them, there's more of them. So there's still probably some of these big animals around, but they're in places like in the sea and things like that.
Yeah. Daniel?
Do you believe in Pangea?
Yes, the description in Genesis is that there was just one continent, and the seas were all, the Lord separated into one land and then one sea, but that was all split up after the flood. It was all, and you can see it. You can see from the geological things, Africa joins up and Europe joins up with Americas, North America and South America, and the geological layers are match up and everything. Mm-hmm. So there's a separation. The Earth is trying to close up the Pacific, increase the Atlantic, just because it's wobbling, and everything in a celestial system wants to become round, and it wants to be equally weighted on its mass so it doesn't wobble like this. And so that's why you have the pushing of their continents east, in our case, west toward the Atlantic, and the ones from the Atlantic are coming east. That's why you have your ring of fire, all your volcanoes around it, the seams of this tectonic movements.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Daniel?
One continent at one time. Yes, but not at the speed that took place right after the flood. They're still moving apart, but it's not. And you can see the plates out in the Atlantic, the ridges.
Yeah, the plates. But that works the same as the boundary layer over an airfoil. And so think of the enormous pressure. How does a plane think about a huge metal plane? How does that lift? Okay, so there's lift underneath, and that lift comes from a boundary layer, and the boundary layer is a small layer of air on top that provides less pressure, and now the pressure underneath the wing raises something the size of a plane. That's how powerful it is. So when you look at these plates in the ocean, we're talking scientists, and it was really country against country. And I'm going to tell you, the United States, our theory is exactly in agreement. They're not trying to prove the Bible, but exactly in agreement with the flood. And the Soviet ones have a different thing, and theirs is their thing cannot answer why the plates are the way they are right now. We know how they are right now. We can make those measurements, and it's clearly a Bible model.
Yeah, everything fits. You can't, if you try and build a model, you can't do it unless you use a flood tectonics and scenario. It just, nothing works. Even the dating systems, we'll get into that. We'll get into some of this carbon-14, which is a short term, and things that exist. The oldest ones that could possibly be, if the system was correct, is 50,000 years old. Even diamonds are supposed to be 1 to 3 trillion years. There's carbon-14 in them. And carbon-14 will disappear within 100,000 years.
Think about the flood. The flood was a judgment of God. And it was a judgment of God because people, the human race, had become so sinful that every thought was evil continually. Okay, and then in Matthew 24, it talks about a time that's going to come back, and it says, as it was in the days of Noah. And look around. Look around the crime, the corruption, the evil. I mean, you talk about this man Harari that openly says what he's trying to do. He's trying to change the sexual orientation of young kids. Okay, you know, you can say what you want to. That's wrong. That's evil. Look at the pornography that's going on. All of this, God said, as it was in the days of Noah, that's how it's going to be at the end of time. We're living in this. And so I think that God's judgment is about to come again. And so that's why the Bible is such an important record, the truth of it. These men have, you know, how I got the name Joshua Project is because Moses communicated with God, and he had to pass his material on to Joshua. And their point is to try to pass on what they've learned through their lifetime to you, the Joshuas coming up. And I think about the responsibility that you have to be the Joshuas. And so how do you prove things? Well, I think one is using the Bible as a standard, because that's truth. And if you don't start with the truth, you're never going to get to a proper conclusion. So you got to have something that's true. And so find something in the Bible that's not true. You know, Jesus said, I am the way, I'm the truth, and I'm the life. And the Antichrist, we talk a lot about the end times and the Antichrist. And he's of his father, the devil. And he was a liar from the beginning. And you look at his description, whether it's in Revelation 13 or Matthew 24, it's always to deceive, to deceive, to deceive. So how does he deceive? He takes part of the truth and part of a lie. And he dulls your mind to it. I think my hope is that God will raise up Joshuas among you. And some of you will use creation and biology. Some of you will use engineering. There's a man back there who's an expert at manuscripts. That's David. He studied manuscripts of Bible, and Mark is studying coins. And we need some archaeologists. And wow, you know what? We need to take these things that are truth and say, look, these things confirm the truth of the Bible. God isn't asking us to believe something unreasonable. He's asking us to believe something that is reasonable. And what is reasonable is that God presented truth to us.
I had so these guys had a question. What was your question specifically, guys? Yeah, or any of you guys? What? There was two. There was one like okay, like an adaptation. Right. Well, within a few generations, we know this from fruit flies, or you want to talk about insects, or like even salmon, it only takes 4 generations to completely change the traits as far as their salinity consumption, right? I talked about haline is the scientific word for salt, right? Salinity adaptation. So euryhaline, they can handle a broad range of salinity, to stenohaline, a very narrow range through genetic mutation of changeable attributes in their genes. It only took 4 generations for the salmon in Lake Michigan to not be able to go back to the ocean and die. But in people, we know genetically in people, within about 3 generations, you start seeing the same traits over and over and over again. You get mutations. And you also get the same traits of the people that live in that vicinity and intermarry, that speak the same languages. You asked about like a town in, Germantown, Pennsylvania, or in Little Italy in New York, and people that speak Italian and they marry Italian people and they have certain traits, right? Those traits are magnified It's a bad example, but it's a really good one. If you get a bunch of poodles, right, and they all live in the same area and speak poodle, that guess what they have? Poodles, right? Right. And over here we got a bunch of German shepherds. There's a separate culture. They're all dogs though, but they don't share genetic traits. It's also a dagger to natural selection that animals. This is a dagger. Let's say your family genetically mutated to an actual favorable mutation somehow, that would a long-term favorable mutation that maybe you guys could hold your breath longer than other people, and you could then thus deep sea dive and catch more fish and survive when other people couldn't. How does that trait get to some guy on the other side of the world in the same kind? It can't. There's no way to pass favorable traits across the entire kind. So favorable traits can't be passed globally anywhere. So it doesn't even benefit the whole species or the whole kind.
Dan,
All those things do not work in natural selection.
let me add a little bit to what
Go ahead.
Dr. Rob Lindstedt said.
Yeah, go ahead.
The scriptures, to me, have made a whole difference in life. It's taught me how to, for instance, as a man, relate to my wife. It has to do with gals, how they're going to relate to guys. It has to do with how you raise your children, what you're going to stand for. We're in a culture, as he says, that's going the other way. But if you want to be successful, you follow the scriptural patterns. You have to pay a real price sometimes. I've had to pay real tough prices. I lived in the Arab world. I've lived here. But also the money I've made and my fortunes, I wasn't raised with a silver spoon in my mouth. Do you know what my fortune comes from? Understanding the flood. Because I found sand and gravel deposits on the Missouri and Kansas River. I knew where to look for them. It took a lot of work to get zoning, to get everything tested, and to build equipment to extract it. That's beyond the technology of any of my competitors. And so I was able to do this. It was a blessing. But let me tell you another interesting thing. If the tribulation comes that he talks about, there's going to be a ruined world. But us that are believers will be resurrected and will be immortals during this period of time. There are going to be certain mortals that go in this, but who's going to guide them to rebuild that world that's talked about in the millennium? Who's going to be building it? It's going to be us. So acquire your skills here so that when you become an immortal in the future, you can ply your trade, because people are supposed to go up to Jerusalem at the Feast of Tabernacles every year. If they don't go up, then there's no water in their land. Well, how are they going to get there unless there's rapid transportation? It can't be slow. So Christ is going to reign, and he's going to use us as what? Kings and priests, as immortals, that will come back and we'll be able to help the people in the future at least ply our trades for, 1,000 years before the eternal state. You know, the millennium is built by humans. The eternal state's built by God. You know, the golden city and transparent things that is in eternity. But the beautiful thing is, we're not going to be there because we're good. It's because we're saved. And there's this whole deal of evolution, like he says, this whole deal of race is a mockery. We're not divided by race. We may be divided by languages, but like I've got 2 daughter-in-laws, they're Chinese. I've got another one who's was engaged to a black gal. But they're not differences that way. Do you see what I'm saying? There's only a division in people between who's going to heaven and who's not. And we're all sinners, so there's only one thing that divides us. That's what Christ has done in our lives. And you're going to have to live in this life following the scriptures. You want a good marriage? It's better if you enter it as a celibate. There's a lot of virtues in this thing that you're going to pay a price. I have a lot of friends that were playboys. They paid a terrible price in marriage. They don't know how to relate. And every time you're involved with someone, you leave part of yourself behind. And everyone mocks at this. I said, yeah, let's look at it. Let's see what the long, like look at me. How old do you think I am? 29? I'm a year and a couple months away from 80 years old. And why do you think I'm that way? Part of it's genes, but part of it is I've lived a very hard life physically. You don't live among the Arabs for a long time and have a good deal and become close to them and live in those situations. But I've kept myself fairly clean, even among the Arabs. I was their banker because they knew they could trust their money with them. They would put me among their women. They knew I wasn't going to be involved with their women. They knew that I wasn't a homosexual. I'm not going to mess around with their boys and everything else. You build a standard, and if you want to pay it, you follow the biblical patterns, no matter what it costs you. And it's cost me a lot of money in business. People wanted me, hey, Dave, you do this deal for me. I'll pay you the money. You don't have to do anything. They cheated on a job and wanted some thousands of tons of sand just invoiced. They paid me for the sand and didn't have to deliver it because they hadn't put it into the soil and everything. And I said, no. There's going to be a judgment that'll be the most expensive. But after that, you went someplace else. But you establish, each one of you is going to establish a reputation out there, good or bad. But when you stand before the Lord, what do you want to have? What do you want to have? You want to be up there and be ashamed of your life? No. He's given us a pattern in the scriptures that we can live by. It's tough. And in these times he's talking about that we're arriving, it's really tough. You're going to pay a price socially and things, but keep your ground. In the end, you're going to win.
Very
Be
much.
happy.
Very much Ephesians 6. Stand firm, stand. And when you're done standing, stand. Question.
This question is more like, what do you think? Do you think that possibly aquatic dinosaurs could still be alive because the flood wouldn't affect them?
Yeah, it's possible. Do you know what percentage of the oceans have been explored? What somebody just said something. 2, 5, maybe 3%, maybe 8%. Yeah, totally possible. You guys realize the oceans are vast and deep, thousands of feet. Who knows? Yes, did you have a question?
My question is specifically related to the Pangea model.
Yeah,
Some models have reduced like the size of the African continent by, I think 18% was the number I'd heard. Maybe I'm off with that.
Okay.
What about that?
Well, the original continent, the single continent, because the scriptures tell us he separated the waters from the land, and that we're talking about a land mass. We're not talking about multiple continents at that point in time. The other thing that's real interesting, if you have a chance to come tomorrow when we do the flood, is when you look at the tectonic plates, and they fit together like a puzzle. And so, you can even find the same deposits in one continent that fits together over here, or where the African continent, I've seen models that have it come all the way up into what we would call the Gulf of Mexico today and separate it out all the way from there. So it's fascinating. It's a great study. It tells you that something happened, it was catastrophic, and it happened fast because these collisions of these plates push these mountains up into the air and force sea creatures to the top of the Himalayan mountains 5.5 miles above sea level. The top of the Himalayas are covered with ammonite fossils. The Nautilus type fossils at the top of the Himalayas. Evolution cannot explain that. Geologic column models cannot explain that. And Dave's right. Those mountains are twisted. Those sedimentary layers are literally vertical. They've been pushed up. You know what the Psalm says? The Psalms say? They say that the mountains were pushed up, were raised up, and the valleys sank down, and the water went to its boundaries. It's right there. Psalm 104. Psalm 104. And you know what, Peter? In Peter's writings, we have it, he says, they deliberately will ignore the flood. And he's saying this at the time of Christ or just after. They will deliberately ignore the flood, although through water the world was made, and through it was destroyed. Through water it was destroyed. And let me ask you a question. This is really kind of not just personal, but all of you guys. Let me ask you this question. If Peter knew that they were going to, why would people deny that there was a flood? They didn't want to deal with judgment. Mm-hmm. Primarily, it's the same problem we have today. Nobody wants to hear they're accountable. Nobody wants to hear there's consequences. The problem we have with abortion in our country is not a girl issue. Guess whose issue it really is? It's your issue, guys, that gets us in these situations. And I'm telling you, it's a moral issue that affects the entire world when the men don't do what they should. So God said, I'm going to take Egypt down, right? So what's he do? What was the primary curse on Egypt that took them out of world hierarchy, power, and everything? The death of the firstborn. If you go through and you take away all the male leaders, all the men, what are you left with? You're left with people that don't have anyone to lead them. You have homes without the father, wives without the husbands, the other part of the equation to raise the children. And you can destroy a culture if you can destroy the father. Look at it in our population, in our cities, in any people group in the world. You destroy the family model with the father and the mother, and the children suffer for it. They pay the ultimate price. And that culture usually doesn't last very long.
Isn't it amazing that that the natural man values, let's say we want a green earth. And so what they do is they, like our friend Hararo said, he said, we're all just an algorithm. And so it doesn't matter whether you're a human or a banana. No, I mean that he used a banana. He said it doesn't matter if you're a human or a banana, you have an algorithm. And so he's saying that a fruit has the same value as a person. And why? Because he doesn't see creation. He doesn't see the act of God in it. So God takes a creation and he puts a soul in it. That's how we're different. We have a soul. I don't want you to be confused when you go to the grocery store. You're not a banana. Okay? And so God made that distinction. But what they do is they say, the same people say we should have a green earth says abortion is fine. Okay, so you see their value system is completely distorted because they don't have a God reference. And that's what can happen. If you don't have a God reference, your value system will be distorted. And I think that's what the world is suffering from. That's what he's saying. Your value system is so distorted because God is not there. And we were designed to have God as the center of our value system.
And just not as mankind as a whole, but each one of you is very important. You're, as Psalm 139 says, we're put together in our mother's womb. We're weaved together. Our days are determined what we're going to look like. And you know what? Genetically, that's true. From conception, there's companies out there that can take DNA from a crime scene, and they could build a profile of the person. Color of hair, what they look like, even their facial features and everything. You are what you are from the time of conception. And God has made each one of us, some of us think, well, I'm not worth much or anything like that, but we really are. We have a very high view. And so anyone that tries to destroy you or you try and destroy someone else, that's a high sin because God has made each one of us for a purpose. We don't always understand that, but He's going to make something out of our lives.
Mark, can you pull up Metaphysics Simon on the YouTube and try to do that? Let me just take you the next step. This last chapel we talked about, or one chapel ago, we talked about Hararo, we talked about Jordan Peterson, and he talked about GPT. And I'm sure that you're aware that that now they're saying that if we can get 12 pictures of you on Facebook, we can make a model of you, and we can do your speech, we can do your mannerisms, and so I'm gonna see if they can pull that up, and here's why I say that, because you see we're just a few months away from making it so that no matter what you see somebody say, you're not going to know if it's them or the image of them that's doing it. And what does the Antichrist do? He gives life to the image of the beast. And so I'm gonna show you something. This is technology that we have now. Give us 2 months and it'll even be better. Okay? But every one of you that filled out Facebook information, hot dog, Google, TikTok, Racktalk, dog chalk, all that stuff, they're building a model of you. And so I was telling him, I lied. I told him my favorite food was tomatoes. I hate them. My favorite flower is a sunflower, dandelion. Okay. Okay. Now, hey, in just a minute, we're going to look at this. And then Carson, there's a lady back here. Her name is Lisa. And she's got 4 baskets in her car that need to be carried out. Would you take 3 people with you to get those? Okay. I need somebody else. I need somebody strong and intelligent.
One of these ladies. You said intelligent.
Okay. Aaron, I need you to take 3 people. See all the songbooks that are over there? I need those songbooks moved from there and all the stuff that belongs to Community Bible Chapel. Aaron, they're going to go back here on those tables. Okay. Piper, I don't want you to do it, but I want you to find 4 girls. I want those 2 tables to go back over there where Mrs. Westerfield is sitting. Okay, because we want to make this switch over. And okay, now watch this is the metaphysics group, and this is almost old, but the technology coming is so that we can give life to any image. Okay, here we go.
Hello, welcome. What's your name?
So I'm Tom Graham from Australia.
And I'm Chris Yume from Belgium. How did you meet?
So actually, we started a company about a year ago, and because it was during the pandemic, we only actually met in person 2 days ago.
Oh.
Oh.
And what is your talent?
So our company's called Metaphysic, and we use artificial intelligence to create hyper-real content. And so we're going to invite our good friend, Daniel Emmett, on stage, who you guys are familiar with from a previous season.
I remember who Daniel is.
And we're going to show the audience something kind of amazing.
How are you, everybody? Nice to see you. Hi. Nice to see you.
You were on how many years ago?
4 years ago.
And you were amazing.
And you were a very good singer. So how did you meet?
We met because, of course, I'm fans of what they do online, and they're fans of AGT. And when they asked me to be a part of this wonderful, unique, original thing they're going to do, I couldn't say no.
Well, look, you're very mysterious. I don't want to ask anything else. Good luck.
Okay, Daniel, take it away.
Thank you so much. Good luck. Thank you, guys.
What did they put together?
That is quite a camera.
go to the three of them. Okay, now remember this is old technology. Okay, what they're working on now. Matter of fact, I just saw, since I talked to you in chapel, China has just announced that they've got their own chat GPT. They're going to overtake it because they want to simulate every single person in the world. They're going to model in the next several months. Okay, there's a war going on. Well, yeah, if we had any nerve, we would have shot those balloons down. Okay, so now, okay, look at this next one.
As fast as he did when he saw this app. Mind you, he was the app. If none of that makes any sense, it will in a minute. Here's Metaphysic.
What is your talent? We use artificial intelligence to create hyperreal content.
The audition was great. The way Simon reacted was amazing. Like, he's a part of the act.
I've always said, is there such a thing as a perfect contestant? A great singer who looks incredible. We just found them.
For me personally, that's why I do it. I want to make people amaze people.
One is the most advanced of the AI that it's fed with.
Sing in a live stage, live for weeks, nights. And tonight, we want to.
Nessun dorma, nessun dorma. Tu furbetti viso nella tua fredda stanza, guardi le stelle che tremano d'amore e di speranza. Ma il mio mistero è chiuso in me. Sulla tua bocca quando ed il mio bacio scioglierà il silenzio che ti fa mia.
Yeah, it's coming.
Yeah, let me, along this line, one of my sons, the oldest one, went to Kansas State, and he's turned out to not to be just one of the gurus we think in Silicon Valley. He may be the guru. And he developed a thing that they'd failed at. Microsoft had failed at, Google it did. It's called HoloLens. And that's where they could take a scan of one of you and produce a virtual so good that you would be standing up here. They could put you as a virtual, and they had some people are developing even further than they took it, using their technology, where they had a girl here. She's talking to the camera. Her virtual is right over here, speaking in Japanese with her inflections. And you look at one and the other, and you can't tell the difference. And they could do that to one of you. They can pick you up, do a scan on you, and you become a virtual person in their system. And someone looks at you, and they don't know the difference between you. You could be standing there, and your virtual will be there in 3 dimensions, full color, indistinguishable. And they can that technology existed 3 years ago, by the way. For instance, if I had cancer, they can do a scan on me and reduce me to a virtual. So the surgeon, he can, with his hands, your mouse in this case is your hand. He could lay me down on a table, my virtual. He can then open me up. Look, he'll see every artery and everything before he ever starts to operate. He knows everything, and he can blow me up, the cancer, with his hands, and then do the surgery as a virtual before he ever picks up his knife. So he won't hit any artery by mistake or any nerve or anything. This is already in the works. These are called holograms. This technology called HoloLens. I didn't know what he was working on. He brought a deal of the solar system, set it down on our kitchen table, in our dining room table, and he could blow it up, and here's everything moving in our solar system. Full motion. You wanted to see Jupiter, you put your finger on it, it blows it up, and there it's rotating and everything else. Everything's going through just like it exists in the solar system. Everything.
Now, some of you don't try that because one of you is enough. But, yeah. Matter of fact, I've often wondered if Mr. Smith is really Mr. Smith. Okay. Hey, I want to encourage you to come to the conference. Maybe some of you haven't registered, but my hope is that we're enlarging your thinking to live in this life, but to prepare for things to come. And we have a solid rock to stand on, don't we? And that rock is the Word of God. That rock is Jesus Christ. So I'm going to let you out a minute or so early. Those of you that have tasks to do, make sure you get those tasks done. Have a great weekend. God bless you.